Hi, everybody. Welcome to Zoran Todorovic Interconnected and TNM Coaching Outline podcast. I'm so grateful and happy to be with you today. As always, this is the space when you come to inspire yourself with the new ideas, with original thinking, to elevate your heart, to elevate your mind and your spirit to the next level or beyond. And today we have this most beautiful elevation with Nikola Jurisic, who is an amazing collaborator and co-creator and dear friend. Very special human being, and you'll see very soon why, because he's wise, intelligent, proactive, creative, and he does a lot of good things in this world. So Nikola is founder and managing director of Transfiguration Advisory, and this firm helps enlightened leaders build beautiful and spiritual businesses. How beautiful is that? Enlightened leaders who are willing to build beautiful and then also spiritual intelligent businesses as well. He's also part of TNM Coaching Extended Affiliation Family and Tribe. Nikola has extensive experience in being coach, facilitator, guide, a teacher. He had more than 20,000 hours in workshops, which is really a huge accomplishment if you think about how many hours do we spend talking to people, facilitating and guiding, and also around 5,000 hours in silence, which I think it's really rare to put on the introduction because people usually will not tell you how many hours they spend in contemplation, in deeper inner work. So he's done inner work. That's what I want to say. Before his position in Transfiguration Advisory, Nikola had worked in many organizations. The highlights are McKinsey for 14 years, when he was serving more than 200 organizations and government entities around the world on cultural transfiguration. And the heart project of Nikola is Project Light, which I also love. This is his deeper contribution to people of Balkans, where he originally comes from, to grow their willpower, to integrate their past, to educate themselves, to heal, to transform trauma so they can be fully functional, beautiful human beings as well. And today's topic is going to be around cultural transfiguration. To start with, we're going to be talking about that, and we're going to dive more into other topics if this podcast gets us there. So once again, thank you for joining us and welcome, Nikola.
Thank you, Zoran. Such a pleasure to be here with you, also in this context.
Yeah, beautiful. So let's dive into this cultural transfiguration, because for me, this word transfiguration, whenever I say it, honestly, I was like, what the heck is it? I know a lot of people know sort of what it means, but I would really love to decode that to begin with, so that the audience, especially the business listeners to this podcast, can understand how is transfiguration relating to culture and what is the merge with culture and transfiguration? What do we really want to accomplish with cultural transfiguration?
Yeah, beautiful question. So it's indeed one of these words, even my own clients in Transfiguration Advisory can't really pronounce it. They say trans and then they say TA because that's the acronym. And, a part of the reason why we put the title for our business, Transfiguration Advisory, is just to put that spiritual aspect, the spiritual and physical, like right out there as a core element. So it's not something, there is collective trauma in the world around religion and spirituality, and many people are sort of, closet spiritualists, and they don't really bring that. It's arguably one of the most important parts of their, life to work. So that's a part of the reason. Now, transfiguration, there's a number of different definitions. Let's start with the dictionary definition. So the dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary, defines transfiguration as taking the whole of something and making it more beautiful and making it more spiritual. This is the definition from a dictionary perspective. Now, you can also look at it as an individual definition. And we can look at Bob Kegan's research, all the key research around vertical development, rather than just horizontal development. Whichever framework you use, we can use Bob Kegan's framework from impulsive self, the egocentric self, the socialized self, the self-authoring, and finally self-transforming, level 5. So transfiguration individually is moving up that vertical current. We can also look at systemically and look at Wilbur and Beck and Cohen and Claire Graves and all those different frameworks of vertical development on a collective level, like moving from the orange meme to the green meme to the teal meme and getting to level 2, tier 2 consciousness and so on. And there's also the spiritual definition. One of my favorite definitions is the spiritual, which links to the Christian tradition. And there's a story in the Christian Bible of Jesus himself being on the top of a mountain and had a moment of transfiguration where he was acting as a bridge between heaven and earth, where his own physical body was a bridge between the temporal and the eternal. And ultimately, my view is this is what we are here to do. We are here to divinize matter. This is our role, to connect to source and whatever that highest potential is, and find ways to act it into matter over time.
Beautiful definition. I mean, I love, when certain words with such a powerful meaning behind it become much more clear, and when we start using them. So for the organizational, people or people who come from the business, what would you say is the distinction or difference between change, transformation, and then transfiguration? Because a lot of the times when we talk about systemic evolution in the business, we will start using the language of change, and then we will lose the language of transformation, and then you're elevating this conversation to the next level of transfiguration. So how do you distinguish that? What is the easiest way to understand the differences?
It's a good question. I mean, maybe let's start with change. And the dictionary definition of change is a variation on the same theme. It's replacing one thing for another thing of the same kind. Mm-hmm. So it's just an exchange of something for another of the same type. And if you look now in organizations, most organizations that use language like change management, it's quite reactive. We have a strategy. We need to implement this organizational transformation strategy. We have XY initiatives. There's a digital theme. There's a supply chain theme. There's a procurement theme, and we're going to push this transformation agenda. There's a people and culture theme. Often we're going to push the transformation agenda forward, and we need to. It's sort of almost like manage the change so that it doesn't hurt us, and it's like a risk mitigation type thinking. Now, if you look at that's kind of one way of thinking. Another way of thinking about it is transformation, which is then a little bit more proactive, where a lot of companies say, well, it's not only about managing change, we also need to create the kind of culture that we would like to have around here. First question is, what is the values and behaviors that are going to serve us? How do we need to behave as an organization to achieve our new strategy that's different from how we're behaving now and how we used to behave before? Because what got us here is not going to get us there. So we need to also look at the cultural element. And the challenge with the word transformation is that it's been significantly co-opted to mean, I worked in McKinsey for 14 years, and our transformation practice, by and large, 95% was value-driven. Maybe in some cases, 100% value-driven, as in there's the bottom line. We need to increase profits, decrease costs, and generate more value. And transformation means transformation that led to 1 billion, 3 billion, 10 billion more dollars of value. So it's been significantly co-opted to mean performance and increasing performance. And that's why the intention with transfiguration is, and also as we spoke about the definition, is to say, yes, it's about that, but it's also about creating a more beautiful place to work. It's also about contributing to a more beautiful world and broadening our lens from just the financial lens to the employees, to the others, to the community, to the stakeholders, to the planet. Because as leaders, it's our responsibility to act from the whole. So we connect to the consciousness of the whole, and then I play my role from the whole for the whole, rather than just for one fragment of the whole, which happen to be the board members, which happen to be the shareholders, which happen to be the people with the money.
Mm-hmm. So I cannot resist to ask you this question before I get into different questions. So when you are talking to leaders nowadays, and I know a lot of leaders are listening to this, and do you feel that people are ready to step into that space of transfiguration, TA, when they're leading the whole to whole? What is your current assessment for the readiness of the leaders, of the readiness of the consciousness?
It's a really good question. I mean, I have somehow an ambivalent view on this topic. So my personal experience has been that McKinsey as an organization that mirrors the global corporate world because advisors mirror the systems they advise.
Of course.
And through this experience, I've seen McKinsey become more and more performance driven and less and less, people, culture focused, if you want to use that language. And that's also part of the reason why I ended up leaving McKinsey, because I was a part of a group of people with sort of related to Aberkin, Mobius, and many of these networks that were really working on this more transfigurational element ultimately. And the vision was, of course, if we can transfigure McKinsey, then McKinsey can help transfigure all these organizations that we as McKinsey used to support back when I was there. And frankly, I sort of lost a bit of faith there. And so my sense is that it's happening, but it won't happen in the ways we expect it to.
Okay.
If I'm going to synthesize and just get straight to the point, it would be, it's happening, and there is no other way, right? And I think many of us recognize this. And it's also natural. This is not something strange. Like we lived in this world of animistic consciousness where everything is alive for 999 out of our 1,000 years of human existence. The sacredness of the nature and the water and the stream and the rocks and everything around us and thoughts and emotions and energy, like all of this is deeply, deeply encoded. It's actually easy for us to go back there. Now, the challenge is, how do we marry the science with that, intuitive aspect? And, neither is better. Science is not better than spirit. Spirit is not better than matter or matter than spirit. We live in this deep dichotomy of, in order to be spiritual, you have to let go of the material. And then the material people, enjoy life and all the pleasures of life. But and then the spiritual people don't. And it's just this weird thing that just doesn't make any sense. And of course, we're both, right? All the ancient wisdom traditions point to the fact that we're both. Even in Orthodox Christianity, which is the wisdom tradition I was born into, we say men have a dual nature, the heavenly nature and the earthly nature. Right. So let's connect to our heavenly nature, and through our earthly nature, act that into manifestation.
Yeah. The reason why I've asked you this question is because sometimes I'm in the space of coaching, guiding, and being in the workshop with leaders who get this, and they really, really, really want this to happen, but they sometimes feel insecure because they don't see that systems, cultures, the reality of the organization, it's fully supporting them to step out and to take the full leadership role, because they would much rather play the political game and wait and see until everything is ready. So, I'm sometimes it's good just to say it, to ask up front, where are we, and to map that so that people can have more confidence, to lead in a new way.
My sense, Zoran, here is it will be an act of courage of each leader as a human to shift from a space of I and optimizing for the I into a space of the we and optimizing for the we, and acting from that space that is not socialized self, that is not meeting the KPIs and living in, because the context is structured in a way that will always lead you towards the short term and the financial, by and large, by the governance of how the boards are set up, the whole
infrastructure.
The whole governance is and those signals will always bring you back to the short term and the financial, and that's also good for you, your own personal benefit. It requires each of us to step out of our comfort zone to, in a way, put our own interests, secondary or tertiary, and and that's not always comfortable, and it's not always easy. But it does require us to put the whole first before our own individual interests. And it's not easy, it requires a lot of courage, and my sense is it's the only way. And what I see is more and more leaders making that leap and saying, I am going to do what I know is best for the whole, even if it's not in my KPIs, even if it doesn't serve what the CEO and the board expect, because I'm listening to my own inner, and this is also why I'm involved in inner development goals, because our inner world should be guiding us rather than an outer world. And this is I think this is, and then, it will never, it will come from each of us individually stepping up and stepping in and saying, enough. We've had, enough of this way of doing things. We see the effects it's having on the collective. And then something funny happens, because once you put the collective first, the collective has a synergistic effect on the individual. And then all of a sudden, actually, there's a lot more for everybody.
Exactly.
But it takes that leap of faith.
Leap of faith. Yeah. I've experienced this in my own life. Whenever I put collective ahead of myself, there's a synergetic relationship. That's more for everybody instead of less for everybody. So now, in order for us to have this leap of faith and to really show up as leaders, is it necessary for the culture of the organization to transfigure itself to the next level of itself to facilitate that? Or how would you link culture into this transfiguration?
Yeah, space? I mean, it's a good question and like very logical next step. So organizations don't change, societies don't change, people do. And it starts with the leaders. Mm-hmm. And those could be positional leaders, like in the hierarchy, or they could be leaders in terms of social influence, or social capital. And when we do this work with organizations, and let's say there's an enlightened CEO that says, okay, I understand this, let's work on this organization, 10,000 people, 50,000 people, whatever it might be. First step is, let's identify what is the shift that the system is yearning for. Not what is the shift based on best practices or what others have done, or go through a deep listening process, connect to the field of that organization, the source energy, the founders of that system, the role that organization serves in the whole, and deeply, deeply, deeply listen. And this process can take 6 months, it can take a year, it really depends. And from that space, articulate what is the shift that is yearning to happen. What is the yearning in the system? And then secondly, that critical mass of leaders, usually 5 to 15%. And we have this like voice value framework that we use in McKinsey. I still use it sometimes. It's like the people that are driving the highest value initiatives and people that have the highest voice, as in the social capital. And look in that top right-hand quadrant, high voice, high value, who are the 5 to 15% of people in the organization, and then help them make that inner shift. Because their inner shift then becomes the outer shift for everybody else. And you cannot work at a system, I worked with the Ministry of Health in a major world country with 365,000 people and, hundreds of hospitals. You cannot work with everybody. But if you find those key roles in the system that carry the most value as well as the most social capital, then you can architect a journey for them, an awakening journey, a transfiguration journey, where they can then go, and many times it's connected to the you process, where they can let go presence and let come of a new mindset, of a new way of thinking, of a new perspective. And then finally, the third step is then you shift also the context, because behavior is contextual. You shift the context to shift the behavior. So we must also change the context for it to align with the shift that we're expecting in terms of how we communicate, in terms of the types of skills that we build for people, in terms of the structures, systems, processes, incentives. And finally, the role models become the people who did the inner shift first. And many, many times, like if you look at how McKinsey looks at this, there's the step 1 and the step 3, but the middle step is missing. Often. Organizations like Aberkin or Mobius will bring it in, but from the standards toolkit, the whole inner world of a critical mass of leaders element is either missing or it's underinvested to such a major degree that it never happens. I mean, out of my experience working with 200 organizations, I've seen this happen once. There was one CEO who said, I know this needs to happen. You guys have done it. Tell me what we need to do, and we'll open up all the doors. And we went and we did a program with the top team. Then we did a program with the top 360 leaders. Then we did a program with the top 1,300 leaders. It was a company of 20,000 people. At the point at which it hit like the 5 to 10% mark, everything shifted, right? So when we speak about scale, it really requires the shift in the consciousness of a critical mass of people to shift the consciousness of the whole and to transfigure the entire system to a higher level of performance. Mm-hmm. And when I say performance, I mean both financial performance as well as all the other forms of performance.
Exactly. So not only financial, but also people performance, the energy in the company, and so on and so forth. So what are the traits of the cultures that we're looking to co-create for the new world?
Yeah, so that's a little bit like, I would say that question has kind of two components. One component is what I would say more sort of the traits in terms of the change process, the capacity to integrate new wisdom, new insights, and to actually transfigure the culture continuously, and this whole listening process. And then there are the traits that are, I would say, it's specific to an organization itself. And let's start with the second, because the second is actually very specific to that specific context. You cannot, yes, you can say the value of fairness is important. It's one of the most important values in Islam. It's there in Christianity. It's a timeless human value. But how does fairness show up in our particular organization, given we're producing metal, or we're a healthcare organization, or we're an insurance or a bank? Given our strategy, given our competitive landscape, given where we are currently, given the people that we currently have, who have a different cultural background and so on. So that is something that you cannot, like values sometimes seem like you can copy paste them between different companies. So, well, everyone should have teamwork. Great. But then once you translate the value of teamwork into specific, observable, concrete behaviors, that then becomes very specific to that 5 to 7 years of period and evolution of that particular system. And that is something that once we did in McKinsey this mapping of the most common values that organizations have, we looked at like 300 organizations, and teamwork's there, / collaboration, there's customer first, these different values, and you can say, well, that's pretty kind of universal, but like, or agility, or whatever it might be. But then the translation of that to something that will only resonate in that system, and ideally when other organizations look at it, they say, what are these people on? Like this stuff doesn't make sense. Like then you're like, okay, we're somewhere, right? And so that's the specific part. The general part is more what we work with in Transfiguration Advisory is meta mindsets, which is more the capacity of the system to transfigure over time, and that has 5 components. The first 2 are more foundational, and the last 3 are more like how you act from there. How do you act from there? So the first is shifting from negative to positive. And you say, well, that's pretty obvious, right? But I can't, if I just had $1 every time I heard things like this, that's just the way we do things around here. You ask people, why is it like this in this company, in this organization? Why don't people collaborate more? Why is it, that the product people don't really get along with the marketing people, or whatever it might be? And then people just say, well, that's just kind of just how it is, right? Or like sometimes people just stare you in silence, and the belief that something can be changed was a lot of my work. Sometimes I'd say I'm like the chief belief officer. I just walk around turning people into believers, because once people think it's possible, like even in the work with the Balkans that you and I are also involved in, like most people say, like change the culture in the Balkans, process the collective trauma in the Balkans. Like, are you crazy? This has been going on since the time of the Turks. Like, I know that his great-grandfather killed my great-grandfather. Like, this will never go away. And so the first step is believing that, yes, it can go away. And so then you step into a space of possibility. Once you're in a state of possibility, you get to the second, which is the classic shift from a reactive to creative space. So what is my role in it? Having a radical focus on what I can control. So it's shifting from blame to ownership, sometimes you would call it in corporate, or from victim to mastery, or from whatever you might call it, right? It's that classic shift of, okay, the change is possible, and I'm going to take responsibility for my piece of making it happen. And radical responsibility for my piece of making it happen. And then you find creative solutions. There's always a solution out there. And then once you start looking for the solutions and acting from that space, then acting in 3 ways. The first way is acting from the whole, for the whole, in a way that will be synergistic, symbiotic, and in which everyone will win. This competition mindset is so deeply ingrained. I interviewed some of the leaders in IKEA recently with the IDGs, and they told me an example of how this energy of competition is coming between. They were speaking to their one of their big franchises globally. I think it was Germany, and they were saying that if we do this, then these other people won't be able to do it, and if they do it, we won't be able to do it. And these people involved with the IDGs at the very top of corporate IKEA said, "Hold on, I need to pause this conversation. I just want to say that you can both do it, and this is not a competition." And all this language like war for talent and like this whole language needs to go. We're collaborating here. There's abundance. There's enough for everybody. So that's one sort of major mindset shift. The second one is moving from us versus them to a unity mindset. And it's, us versus them shows up in corporates as silos, right? Or my team versus your team, or whatever it might be, my budget versus your budget, but really starting to play my role in the organization, whether that's a call center agent or the CEO, from the perspective of the whole. And that's really the unity. You have a unity mindset, unity consciousness, and finally acting from creating systems that are fair. So many systems are, even unconsciously, I work a lot in the Middle East, and of course there's a preference towards locals. There's Qatarization, there's Emiratization, there's Saudization. So there's preference for the locals, and that's fine, but then let's hard code that into processes and say this is the degree of preference that we're going to give the locals because we have a local Emiratization agenda or Saudization agenda. Versus then you hear all these things like the person was fired and then he talked to the CEO and he came back through the back door, and it just undercuts the whole thing, right? So it's really, really important just to create structures and processes that are fair and, equal for all, because it's like the American dream, right? Effort equals reward. If there's no link between effort and reward, people say, fuck it. Like, why am I even trying? Like, that guy got promoted and, all of this stuff is happening, but it's not related because, because he's more skilled or because he deserved it. It's because, he knew somebody or whatever it might be. So, and you can also say, knowing somebody matters, but then let's, make that fair and clear.
Exactly. So let me kind of summarize for the audience. So the transition of the meta mindsets are moving from the negative to positive, which is, always something that we kind of say yes, but, we all know that takes energy and time. Moving from reactive to creative, activating your creational energy and taking full responsibility, being able to move from win-lose to win-win, transcending and transfigurating this deep program that we all have when it comes to competition. And then from, us versus them to unity, from silos to the holistic, and then to subjective, relationship to fair. So those are all the transitions. So what needs to happen? And that's a very interesting question. Just take time to really, I can think about it alongside with you. What needs to happen for people to be able to go to this transition? First of all, how do we move ourselves through it? And who do we become when we embody that meta mindset? Which is all linked for the listeners, just to link everything to Culture Transfiguration, for us to be able to create most beautiful cultures for all of us. We got into the meta mindset from the position, how do we create the culture? What is the quality of the culture, individual and organizational level? So just be connecting those transitions and shifts into creating the culture that we want to see.
Yeah, I'd actually love to hear what you think about that. But maybe before that, just to say one word of the why meta mindsets, because, having spent my whole career doing culture work at governments and organizations around the world, different industries and different contexts, I found that these 5, if you will, shortcuts, or the mindsets that underlie all the other mindsets. Because there's also the mindset of, grit. There's the growth mindset. There's many mindsets out there, but I found that these 5 mindsets are always there. Whenever you come into a system, you can hack. It's like a hack. You can look at okay, to what degree are people believing it's possible versus not possible? To what degree is there creative energy? To what degree is it, us versus them versus like a whole, a coherent, unitary whole? To what extent is there unfairness in the system, and how does the unfairness show up, and so on? So that's sort of like the meta aspect of it. And of course, once we make that transition, then the transfiguration can become an ongoing process. It's like opening up 5 different taps for the energy to flow between divinity and matter, and then it will just become a self-birthing, self-recreating, self-renourishing process. But now, how do you move, from one end of the other? I know that's also an area that you have a lot of expertise, and I'd love to hear your view.
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things is making people aware. I think the first shift, even though this is on a certain level of common sense, and this is the beauty of those transitions from my perspective, because we all know it. And as you beautifully say, this is all, even if we have a different transition mapped in organization development, systemic evolution, this is one of underpins everything. So we all know it subconsciously. And I also think it's a part of how do we function in a collective as an archetypes as well, and what do we need to shift. So first thing for me, it's awareness. So for people who are listening and like getting aware, wow, this is possible. Also, the shift of being able to recognize certain things in your organization, in your company, and so on and so forth, into the space of, okay, this is happening. Like when you mention win-win, which is win-lose, the silos, a lot of people can see that, and they can see, we do know we need to transcend the silos, but, so becoming aware. And I think that also people need to be supported, coached, and guided through the transformational processes. Like the whole notion of becoming aware, it's great, you're conscious, but then what? Then how do you take enough energy, power, strength to be able to shift yourself, to move yourself to this transfigurational process of deeper inner transformation, to emerge as a leader, human resource manager, talent development officer, leadership development, a creator, or, employee or systemic influencer, to really embody that? How do you really shift that? And how not to fall backwards into the system, because the system has a huge gravitational energy. So if you work in a pool, it pulls you back into the status quo or the same old. Then how do you move yourself out? So for me, I think that, what people really need to see, and I'm not selling coaching here and advisory and also guidance, we all need support to be able to be facilitated to the internal shifts first on an individual level, to gain that insight, to be able to see the importance of the bigger whole. So that's one of my perspectives. What about yours?
Beautiful. Thank you. So 2 things that come up for me when I listen to you. One is this framework of awareness, choice, practice. Mm-hmm. And it's a very simple framework for how behavioral change happens. So first we have to, when I don't know what I don't know, it's not very helpful. And the first step is I know what I don't know, but at least I know that I don't know it. And then I can choose. And that's the sort of heart energy of saying okay, enough. I'm going to go down on this path. And then there's a practice, which is an embodiment part, which is then moving from the thinking and the efforts, from being consciously unskilled to being unconsciously skilled, and going up those stages. And I certainly think that support in many different ways is very, very helpful. And one encouragement I would really have for people is I find a lot of people sort of get tired of the corporate world, and I say, I'm done with the rat race. I'm done. This is very stressful. I'm done with the system. And then they leave and they kind of go a bit radically in the other direction. And then they go look for themselves in whatever way that looks like. And maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years later, they're still in that journey. And my invitation is really to bring these 2 things together, really bring these 2 things together. And I'm doing it in my own way in Transfiguration Advisory, but I think for all of us in our context, it's not about leaving the old context behind. It's about bringing ourselves fully, speaking our truth, bringing all of ourselves and bringing all of ourselves to that organizational context, and together shifting the energy of the big pharmaceutical company we work for, the big bank that we work for, or the big metals and mining firm, or whatever it might be. And I think that is more needed. The courage to stay in the tension and in the pain of the current system, and yet, bring this new energy. And all of us have our own, different ways. Both you and I have chosen a way to be, advisors to leaders. Even when I was in McKinsey, I was still an advisor. And there's people whose role it is to actually be those leaders, actually be stand for something. So yeah, I think I'd really want to encourage, because I see a lot of people. I'm here in Thailand right now, Koh Phangan, and I travel to a lot of these places. I know you're in Pizza. There's a lot of these places like Bali, Byron Bay, many places in California, and people kind of check out and they say, well, I'm going to look for myself. It's like, okay, there might be a period of that, but how do we integrate these two energies? That's really the question within ourselves and then in our expression in the world.
Yes. And we're going to talk about it in our next podcast, because I think that's where, we can leave it for today, because that integration of this conversation, how this happens, can be a topic in itself. And today we got a lot of great information around what's possible with the cultural transfiguration and how we transfigure ourselves and then our culture. So 2 things to end the podcast, Nikola, for today. So in my introduction, I said, one of your passions and what you really want to work with, it's creating beautiful spiritual businesses. So I would love to ask you, if you were to share your vision, what is a beautiful, spiritual, intelligent business? What would you say?
That's a great question. I must admit, I haven't really thought through that so much, but ultimately it's an organizational field that's connected to the highest potential of that organization from the whole, and that it's constantly recreating and regenerating itself. And there's this sense of aliveness in that organization, and it's really in service of the whole.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that's the simplest way. That's the simplest way I can put it.
Beautiful. The great explanation, because I sometimes love this simple context just for leaders and people who listen from this, is to know where we're aiming to, and because we're introducing a new language as well. So what that means, it's great. And then, how would you like to leave our audience with? Anything, any practice, any contemplation, any exercise, anything that you feel somebody who listens to our conversation can play with, integrate, think about, whatever comes naturally to you at this moment?
So I think the thing that comes to me now is, given that we talked about it, the meta mindsets is, consider or take simply the checklist of the meta mindsets and consider what degree is your organizational context or your team context or your department, whatever is your most natural context at work. To what degree are these playing out? Is it more in the negative, more in the positive? Just simply put these 10 words on a page, negative, creative to reactive, win-lose, competition energy to win-win, us versus them to unity, there's only really us, and then finally subjective to objective. And then just on the bar, put a little chevron, is where are we, in our team right now? And I think to your point, Zoran, that can generate some awareness and some conversations around, okay, maybe this is where our energy is blocked right now. And maybe we do believe it's possible. We're all stepping up and taking leadership for our own piece, but we're not doing that from the perspective of abundance, but we're doing that from the perspective of scarcity. And maybe that's what we need to work on. So that's, I think that's one very, very simple thing, because these things are universally applicable. You can look at country cultures. When I speak about the Balkans, the people from Lebanon or from the Middle East, but in particular that part of the Middle East, I describe how our culture is, and they often say, well, it's exactly the same in Lebanon. Everyone's in victimhood. It's always the government's fault, and it's always someone else. There's not enough money. It's the garbage crisis. There's, all these other neighbors that are so it's all these externalizing energy. And then you get okay, so that's the second meta mindset. They're in blame energy that's not allowing them to step into the creator energy.
Nikola, thank you so much for coming to TNM Unplugged, the Jurisic Interconnected podcast. Thank you for your vivid intelligence and for your ability to bridge between, organizational, systemic evolution, transfiguration, and spiritual, with the wise teachings. I think that we need more people like yourself in the world today who are able to be wisdom holders and way showers, but who are also able to work from inside out with the organizations when people do want to transfigure and transform. I'm like you, seeing this more and more and more, especially with the younger generation, that we really want to see the ecosystems or the sustainability and beautiful future for our planet. So time is now. So if you're listening to this, leaders, HR executives, managers, and employees, listen again and get inspired. And also you can find more about Nikola at his website. It's going to be linked in the description of the podcast below. Also, you can go to tnmcoaching.com and find his profile if you're curious to be engaging and working with him. Once again, Nikola, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and we'll see each other soon. And thank you so much for tuning in today. Once again, it was so lovely. Good comments. We love that you send comments week by week, and we're also grateful to add value to your life and to your work and beyond. Thank you.
Much love, Zoran.